Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, members of the broader higher education community. I'm Richard and teaching at the institution. It is with a profound sense of sadness, yet also gratitude, that we gather today to honor the life and work of Professor Lange. We come together not only to mourn her passing, but to acknowledge the deep and lasting impact she made on us as her colleagues and her friends, but also on our university and across the higher education sector in South Africa. Before we continue, it's my privilege to formally welcome members of Professor Lange's family, in particular Professor Jane Bennett, colleagues and friends who have traveled from the University of Cape Town and the University of the Free State, representatives from the Council of Higher Education and the Siyaphumelela Network, members of the Stellenbosch University community across faculties and divisions, and all who worked with, learned from, and walked alongside Liz over the years. We thank you for being here. Your presence speaks to the regard in which she was held. Liz would no doubt not be impressed of what we are doing today and probably would have said we should have had a glass of whiskey instead. But sometimes one should not listen to Liz and maybe just follow your own head as well. So I'm glad that we've done this. Liz joined Stellenbosch University during a period of change and reflection. We all know that Liz was not one to stand at the edges, especially not at a critical time for teaching and learning at Stellenbosch University. She approached the work with passion, directly and thoughtfully. She brought a seriousness about the academic renewal project, and she brought a depth of experience that shaped our institutional conversations in meaningful ways. Her presence influenced our thinking. Her voice sharpened our understanding, and her example grounded us in the values that guide the purpose of university. Today's service is an opportunity to remember her contributions with clarity, to listen, to reflect, and to honor the work she cared deeply about. We will now move into the tributes, beginning with a tribute on behalf of Stellenbosch University, delivered by our Rector and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Daresh Ramjuganov, whereafter I will read a tribute on behalf of Dr. Mala Singh and Professor Salim Badat, after which we'll have a short musical interlude again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, and members of the Lange and Bennett families. Today, we honor a scholar of depth, a leader of principle, and a colleague who shaped our thinking in meaningful and lasting ways. Professor Liz Lange was someone who held a clear and unwavering view of the purpose of higher education. She believed deeply that universities are institutions in service of society, not only in theory, but in practice. That understanding guided everything that Liz did. Now, when Liz joined Stellenbosch University, she stepped into an environment actively working towards academic renewal. She did not position herself outside of that process. She entered it directly, thoughtfully, and with the full weight of her experience. She brought to us her years of work in teaching and learning leadership, her sector-wide experience through the Council on Higher Education, and the insight she gained from leading complex academic environments at the University of the Free State and the University of Cape Town. She did not simply contribute to conversations. She shifted their center of gravity. And I think that anyone's worked with Liz, you would know that influence that she has in that regard. What I valued most about Liz was her integrity. She was never afraid to tell me how it was. And she would use some of the most colorful language to do that. But I think anyone that knew Liz closely knew she did it with real heart and passion, and that is the way it came across. She approached the academic project with seriousness and care. She believed that excellence and transformation strengthen one another. She reminded us that inclusion is not a concession, but a foundation for quality. And she insisted that we make decisions not for convenience or efficiency, but for what is right, what is credible, and defensible in the long term. Her work with the Division for Learning and Teaching Enhancement reflects this. She invested in the people. She invested in building shared understanding. She invested in enabling colleagues to carry the work forward with confidence. The Siya Phumelele Student Success Initiatives, the curriculum conversations, the strengthening of teaching and learning practices, these were not abstract concepts for Liz. They were practical responsibilities, all undertaken with purpose. Liz brought clarity into spaces where complexity often makes clarity difficult. Those who worked closely with her will recognize the familiar moment, a pause, a slight tilt of the head, and then a comment that was not loud or dramatic, but unmistakably precise. And sometimes we didn't like to hear that. She had a particular gift for saying exactly what needed to be said at exactly the right time, with no unnecessary words. And I think you'll all agree that we were better for it, for that kind of precise getting to the point and telling us what needed to be done. She was also very warm. Besides that rough exterior, if you really got to know Liz, one of the warmest people, one of the most compassionate people. Her humor was subtle, sometimes dry, often exactly what is needed to remind us that even serious work benefits from humanity. conversations with Liz were always honest, and they were real. And what they always did is they always moved the work forward. Liz spent a short time with us at Stellenbosch University. And her legacy at Stellenbosch University is not only in frameworks or plans, it is in how we now understand our task as an institution, in how we speak about student learning, in how we consider belonging, in how we hold ourselves accountable to the idea that universities exist to serve society. To the Lange and Bennett families, thank you for sharing Liz with us. To our colleagues in Learning and Teaching Enhancement, thank you for continuing the work that Liz has started at a leadership level, and take that forward with the passion we know Liz would want you to take it forward in the institution. And to our broader academic community, may we honor Liz by sustaining the commitment that she modeled to work with clarity, to work with integrity, and to care. We are grateful for the time that we have had with Liz. I can assure you her influence remains at this institution and all the institutions where she undertook her work. Liz's work at Stellenbosch University continues through us in the institution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darish. Friends, next is a tribute by Dr. Mala Singh, friend and colleague of Professor Lange, with input from Prof. Salim Badat, the first CEO of the CHE and friend of colleague of Prof. Lange. I hope that I can bring across the emotion, what they try to say, and not just read the words that they have provided me with, because they were not able to join us today, but I hope that they are joining us online. Prof. Mala Singh, for those who do not know her, is former professor and head of philosophy at the University of Durban Westville, first executive director of the HEQC of the CHE, professor of international higher education policy at the Center for Higher Education Research and Information, at the Open University, United Kingdom. Prof. Salim Badat is first CEO of the CHE and friend of colleague of Prof. Lange, as mentioned. He's a former VC of Rhodes University, former research professor in the College of Humanities, UKZN, and professor in the Department of History at the University of the Free State. Liz's death is an immeasurable loss to so many of us who were her friends, her family members, and loved ones, and her colleagues. Some of us are still struggling to understand the many ways in which her death will diminish something important in our lives: the loss of solidarity and deep friendship, and the possibilities of conversations on the most serious political and theoretical questions, or the most mundane of our daily struggles. I first met Liz in 1997 when she came to work in the Center for Science Development, the funding arm of the HSRC, which funded research at the universities. I was executive director of the CSD at the time, and she was employed as a liaison officer in one of the divisions of the CSD that dealt with international research cooperation initiatives. With her usual passion, dedication, and capacity for hard work, she very quickly worked herself into the newly developing initiatives of the CSD, especially the post-94 imperatives of building research capacity and widening the range of research themes and partnerships which were most suited to the new reconstructive context. In this early part of her career, she was already showing the promise of a very strong diagnostic and strategic skills and her fully engaged, fully researched, and thoughtful approach to every task. This approach would be so immensely valuable to the work of the CHE in the years to come, and no doubt to the universities where she worked in her later years. Her work in the CSD was Liz's entry into the world of newly emerging national science and research policy and the development of equity-oriented initiatives to support research and strengthen research capacity development. The CSD became part of a newly constituted National Research Foundation where Liz worked as a manager in the Division for Social Sciences and Humanities until 2000. She joined the CHE in 2001, attracted by the chance to work in an organization that was embarking on a number of initiatives to stimulate national debate on key transformation themes in higher education and develop well-researched, widely consulted on, and considered policy advice for the Minister of Higher Education for a continuation of moral and political struggle on another front. She was excited at the prospect of joining a project that we in the CHE understood ourselves to be engaging with in those early days, translating progressive values and principles into enabling systems and implementable strategies for change. Also into intellectually credible and practically useful projects focused on higher education transformation. Because of her strong analytical and conceptual skills, the capacity to manage multiple projects and take on a huge work agenda that we know, she soon became a highly valued member of the senior leadership team at the CHE in its early foundation-setting years, an immensely supportive colleague to the CEO, Prof. Salim Badat, and to me as Executive Director of the Higher Education Quality Committee at the time, a post in which she eventually succeeded me in 2007. As the first Director of Policy Monitoring and Evaluation in the CHE, she spearheaded the process to develop the CHE's draft policy document towards a framework for the monitoring and evaluation of South African higher education in 2004. Monitoring and evaluation was one of the functions assigned to the CHE by the Higher Education Act of 1997. Using the data gathered from the HEIs by the Higher Education Department, Liz and her small research team in the CHE produced trend analyses relating to the existing and evolving higher education system, analyses which were to be crucial in providing the evidentiary basis for the CHE's advice to the Minister of Higher Education. As Director of Monitoring and Evaluation, she was also deeply involved in several of the task themes, projects, and publications launched by the CHE in that foundational first decade. For example, the new academic policy document in 2001-2, Governance in South African Higher Education, also 2001-2, Community Engagement in Higher Education between 2005-8, South African Higher Education Responses to Students with Disabilities in 2004, and the investigation into higher education institutional autonomy and academic freedom in 2005-8. Her substantial participation in such a large number of crucial CHE policy investigations provided her with unparalleled access to the key debates about higher education transformation at the time and an opportunity to understand what the opportunities, obstacles, and dangers were in the achievement of systemic and institutional imperatives for deep-rooted change. So much of the policy research and development of new policy proposals undertaken by the CHE at the time, so many of the well-researched and deeply reflected on CHE publications from that first decade and a half bore the imprint of Liz's passionate and efficient involvement, often in multiple projects simultaneously undertaken, either as a lead researcher, project or research coordinator, or sole author or editor. No doubt, a more comprehensive history of the CHE will yield a fuller picture of Liz's multifaceted role and impactful contributions to the CHE at the time when the foundations for rethinking transformative change in higher education were being set at the CHE, but also at larger systemic and institutional levels. The work of the HEQC, the quality assurance and quality improvement arm of the CHE, also benefited greatly from Liz's involvement in a number of HEQC mandated functions. The institutional profiles produced by Liz and her team using data from the Higher Education Department, the NRF, the CHE, and HEQC were indispensable for the work of the HEQC as it prepared for the first round of institutional audits in the early 2000s. The profiles were shared with the institutions, some of whom used them to prepare their own self-evaluation reports, and were used by the HEQC to prepare the audit panels for the evidence-gathering tasks during the site visits and for preparing the preliminary and final HEQC reports to the institutions. But if the CHE and HEQC benefited from Liz's dedicated involvement in several key functions and projects, Liz herself was accumulating a vast knowledge base on higher education and honing an impressive set of skills and strengths, which would propel her career forward to new heights. Her stellar analytical and strategic work within the 3 universities where she worked in senior leadership and management positions in her later years had its foundations in her earlier roles in the CHE, where she had the vantage point of engaging with the new policy frameworks and implementation challenges of higher education, seen from a national system level, while at the same time having an overview of how the individual higher education institutions were giving effect to new policy imperatives in their core functions and transformative projects. The focus of the HEQC's first round of audits on teaching and learning generated an enormous amount of information on academic planning, budgeting, and oversight of teaching and learning at the universities, a great deal of which Liz had closely analyzed. This early systemic and institutional knowledge and her intense engagement with teaching and learning challenges, not only through the work done in the HEQC audits, but also in the national reviews in targeted areas like the MBA and selected teacher education qualifications, provided the basis for the recognition of her expertise on academic planning, for the enhancement of teaching and learning, which was so central to the senior leadership and management roles that she took on after she left the CHE in 2011. When I left the CHE, it was self-evident that Liz would take on the executive directorship of the HEQC, which she led with a usual blend of rigor, intellectual depth, strategic nuance, crushing hard work, collegiality, and theoretical and political sophistication. These trademark characteristics and many others were only to strengthen and become more evident as she continued her career trajectory beyond the CHE, taking on a number of senior leadership posts at 3 different universities. We had talked about the necessity of having an international external evaluation of the HEQC after the first round of institutional audits. It was mainly Liz who ensured that this happened after I had left the CHE, leading the production of a self-evaluation report that was comprehensive and thorough, measured but self-critical, where she did not shy away from confronting weaknesses and errors at systemic level within the higher education institutions and not least in the HEQC's conceptions and practices themselves. Her range and depth of knowledge and the thoughtful work also brought invitations to participate in international initiatives, giving her the opportunity to serve on the board of the International Body for Quality Assurance at the time, the International Network for Quality Assurance Agencies in Higher Education, to participate in UNESCO initiatives on quality assurance and higher education more generally, and an invitation to serve on the review panel evaluating the work of the European Quality Assurance Register for Higher Education based in Brussels, which accredited quality assurance agencies evaluating universities in European countries. Liz served as acting CEO of the CHE in the period 2007 to 2008. She left the CHE to join the University of Free State in 2011, where she eventually became Vice Rector Academic between 2014 to 2018. She applied for the post of VC at UFS, but despite having all the intellectual and strategic knowledge and skills and policy acumen to have been appointed as VC, she was not. It was not the only time when her radical progressiveness, her consistent pursuit of public good objectives, and her willingness and courage to call out mediocrity and confront new liberal compromises, as well as shallow and opportunistic narratives of transformation, made her seem threatening or not an appropriate fit. It is interesting that on her death, some in higher education have praised the very values that made her disliked or tolerated or only rhetorically supported in her work worlds in higher education. One can only hope that some of her colleagues in the different academic institutions where she worked will draw on the key values and approaches that characterize the work, no matter how small or technical or administrative the task. Whatever she took on was always normatively framed, theoretically reflected on, strategically apposite, and operationally efficient. In her later years, she desperately wanted to spend more time writing, especially on the ideas of Hannah Arendt, with which she had had a lifelong intellectual and political obsession. Although, sadly, she didn't succeed in this ambition, she did publish many journal articles and book chapters where she can be seen grappling, as always, with the theoretical, ethical, and political assumptions underpinning not only the current trends in higher education, but also with the larger questions about the role of universities within changing forms of capitalism, the limits of radical university transformations within a capitalist system and a Western model, and the relationship between anti-capitalist and anti-colonial, decolonial struggles. In reality, every task that she approached in all her different roles in higher education was deeply thought through, enriched by a wide reading of philosophy, sociology, and politics, informed by contemporary higher education studies, and underpinned by a belief that a more just society and a more just and diverse epistemic order could be built, and that universities had to be pushed hard to find how best to contribute to those ideals. Thank you very much. We're now going to have a music interlude of some of Liz's music, and then we'll continue with tributes afterwards. Thank you to the wine and string quartet. Next, I'm going to call Liz's life partner, Professor Jane Bennett, to lead the tribute on behalf of the family. Jane.
I want to start, of course, by thanking Stellenbosch University and Prof. for bringing us all into the space this morning. I want to tell you something, though, that will move the mood a little bit and then take us back. I also want to say something about my own relationship to being here at the podium. Liz has a very large family, one to whose well-being and health and liveliness she was passionately committed. I want to say something about that. I'm a new member of that family and deeply honored to be so. But here's something that those of you who were we had a memorial, a different kind of memorial last Friday, and those of you who were there, sorry, I'm going to tell this again. I think you'll agree that it's worth hearing more than once if this is the second time. As somebody who did, as we've just heard Prof. Singh describe, bone-crushing work, long hours of work, some of the most profound and important relationships Liz had were with those who worked with her as administrators. These were intimate relationships. These were relationships through crises and celebration, through despair and through the horror of the mundane memo that refused to be sent. And on one particular day, in the middle of one of those days at the University of Cape Town, somebody told me this story, it's not mine, but I do have permission to share it, that her personal assistant was told very, very firmly by Liz, no uncertain terms, door is shut, not here, shut, shut, shut. A parent kept phoning, have to talk to leadership, have to talk to a DVC. No. What is it about? It's about drugs. The person thought, am I going to be responsible for not telling UCT leadership that there are trails of drugs all over the campus? So knock. Prof, I'm sorry, there's a desperate parent wants to talk. What about? On the computer. Drugs. Buying or selling. And there we have it. There we have Liz Lange at work in the world with the key question, because what other question matters? Okay, buying or selling. I wanted to say something taking us from that very, if you like, engaged image of our Liz to thinking a little bit about what it means to be asked to speak to a tribute, to give a tribute on behalf of a family. Liz's family, my family, the togetherness of us, the Stewart family, are diverse, complicated, unique across countries and contexts and relationships. I did ask, I am a new member. I would have been married to Liz 4 weeks ago. She died 4 weeks ago on the Saturday of then. So I'm very, very new. Very honored, but very new. I did ask some family members what I should say and should not say. They said, oh, just say. So I think part of having the honor of being able to speak with you for a few minutes is to recognize that I have a little bit of time and I need to spend it in a way that honors Lise, that is not a thanks to her or a list of her achievements, astounding as that list may be, and that doesn't perhaps use ideas that are familiar to giving a tribute. Lise did not like the familiar. She liked the adventure. So I'm going to begin with talking about the fact that a key difference between myself and Lise was not a feminist. Hannah Arendt was not a feminist. That is why she was not a feminist. But I am. And nonetheless, we agreed very deeply on something that mattered to both of us within university spaces and world spaces, and that is reproductive labor. 2 centuries ago, Engels reminded us that anything that is for profit depends on the unwaged reproductive labor, whether you call that the family, the home, the person sweeping the corridor, the person who is not given but works in the university and dies, a memorial like this, the person who is absolutely essential to the possibility of an economy and yet continually erased. And quite often, the family is that space, isn't it? Whatever that is created of, however many people, however many relationships, is the space that gets the nod. You must go home to your family. When I was retired, is it? I was happy to leave, but still, people, it's so rude. It's like, oh, it's rude. But people would say to me with a pitying look in their face, "Oh, Jane, are you going to enjoy your grandchildren?" As in, like, now, as opposed to when I was there. I mean, suddenly I'm going to enjoy them. Whoa, ooh, hey, hey. And Lise cared about part of the reproductive, which I would call embodiment. Those of us who learned very deeply from Roads Must Fall, Feeds Must Fall, I am one of those, will have heard very often the term black pain. That was a term that was vilified in all kinds of ways, used against the activists, was used against them without beginning to think what it meant theoretically. We have BICO for consciousness, right? We have fees must fall for the body, for pain. And I'm not wanting to make any equivalent between that activism and Lise. I'm making a theoretical point, which is that bodies are involved in university spaces, not simply in minds, not simply in markets. As you crouch over the computer, as you go home, exhausted, with the cramp in your back, with the sickness in your stomach, that is a relationship to what it means to fight for humanity in a university. Jonathan Jansen's piece about Lise made a clear point. He says that the particular years of fight for Lise at UCT killed her. I'm not sure it's as simple as that, but it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to know that deep stress deep stress hurts the reproductive, meaning the body's ability to recreate themselves, to keep going. And I'm speaking not now about Lise who needed new lungs. I'm speaking about all of us. I'm speaking about what it might actually mean to create an educational space in which people did not get hurt. You can hear I have some shots to shoot. I do. Okay, I'm done. Because he also knew all that. You might want to think, why? If you know that, why? Why do that? I'll tell you something. There she was on her hospital bed. We were in many hospital beds, and I have enormous thanks to the nurses and surgeons and people who stayed with the family during that period. And we'd been talking a lot about the fact that she still had work she wanted to do. She still had work with her team. I can see you here at Stellenbosch. And you were being so amazing and so patient. And with Candace, Prof, can you? And she couldn't. And we sat and we talked and we said, no, gots to do it, have to resign. Lise Lange has to resign. And she phoned you, Teresh. She phoned you. And she spoke about the fact that she couldn't do her work. And your Vice-Chancellor said, that's okay. We'll put you on long leave. You've given so much, not letting you resign. I mean, Prof. But it was a huge, it was like, no, not letting you go. Put down the phone. I have never seen her cry like that. She loved her work. For some members of her family, that was very hard. The opposite, the person seducing Lise away from you was her work, was her desk, it was Hannah. Why did she love it so much? It was not about higher education. Higher education was the space, bewildering to some, through which she believed that it was possible to take on the behemoths of the military, the AI, the way in which the individual is asked to become simply a unit for somebody's profit to flow through without their even recognizing it. She hated that. She wanted minds. She wanted solidarities. Where in the world do you get thousands and thousands and thousands of 19-year-olds arriving on your doorstep every January with nowhere to sleep, not having got a placement, with so much energy and excitement? It's either an army or it's a university. It's a miraculous opportunity. Every single January, those beautiful people who don't care about rankings. They don't. They really don't. Every single website in this country of universities, they're re-ranking. Here. They don't care. They care. Yes, I know why we have to care. They want recognition for their uniqueness, their capacity, their extraordinary resilience, the impossibilities. Lise knew that, and she threw herself towards them, even though they didn't even know who she was often, with such extraordinary ferocity. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, for reminding us why we are actually here. Next, I'm going to call on Ms. Miriam Hussain, the Chief Director of Human Resources, colleague of Liz at the University of Cape Town, and also colleague of Liz now at the University of Stellenbosch, to come up.
Thank you very much, Prof. Richard. Rector and Vice-Chancellor, members of the family of Lise, the University Executive, colleagues in the venue and online, friends, and all who knew and loved Lise, good afternoon. It is a huge honor and a privilege to gather with you today and to pay tribute to our dear colleague and friend, more formally known as Professor Maria Lise Lange, on behalf of our former colleagues at the University of Cape Town and also some colleagues from our Stellenbosch University community. Firstly, I'd really like to thank our university and Lise's family for giving us this opportunity to honor her memory and to celebrate her life. So Lise and I joined Stellenbosch University on the very same day, in the very same year, both having come from UCT, where we worked closely together for many years. I remember so clearly bumping into her in our admin C that morning. We spoke excitedly about new beginnings, the opportunities to contribute, the need for good flat shoes, which is why I have to stand on my toes, and how hopeful we both were for what lay ahead and the opportunities that our university was providing us. Little did I know that one day soon, too soon, we would be standing here speaking these words in her memory. When I reached out to former UCT colleagues to gather the reflections for today, the responses were unsurprisingly overwhelming, and I want to thank them for that. There were many messages, each filled with affection, admiration, and very interesting and importantly, as an academic, people were hugely grateful for having Liz in their life. I hope I do Liz and my UCT and Stellenbosch colleagues justice in bringing our collective voice together today in her memory. And I have to just say, you know, Jane, you kept looking up there. That is such a beautiful picture of Liz, and that's how we remember her. Many colleagues who wrote about Professor Lange wrote affectionately about her as our Lise. Yeah? They wrote, she was many things to us at UCT, and she will be remembered and loved for many things by all of those she impacted. As one former colleague wrote, our friend, our comrade and colleague, Lise Lange, died today. I post this image of her in a place I prefer to remember, her office, framed by Marx, Fanon, and Arendt. Lise was a socialist in the truest sense, principled, ethical, critical, and unwavering in her commitment to justice and transformation. She carried the academic project through COVID with courage and clarity. She possessed a depth of thought and conceptual grasp at the DVC level that was unparalleled in the South African higher education context. Her legacy lives on in the colleagues she mentored. She mentored many people, and in the intellectual honesty she demanded of us all. Rest in power, Lise. One colleague recalled her remarkable role as part of the annual salary negotiation process as chief negotiator for UCT with the Academics Union. At first, Lise was apprehensive about taking on that responsibility. She hadn't had much experience in labor relations per se, especially not in bargaining for increases and benefits. But with her well-known integrity, intellect, and importantly, humor, she quickly earned the trust and confidence of the Academics Union, leading negotiations with grace, principle, and empathy. She ensured the process was fair and the outcomes balanced, finalizing negotiations timeously while maintaining genuine trust. And colleagues, that doesn't come easy in the context of negotiations. And respect on all sides. But that was Lise. We will miss her energy, her wit, her unwavering commitment to UCT and to the academic project. But Lise was far more than a colleague. Another colleague wrote as follows: Lise was a dear friend, an intellectual sparring partner, a confidant, and one of the rare people who always offered honest perspective. She never sought to please. She sought to speak truth. At a time when conformity too often threatens the purpose of a university, Lise was different. She stood out, not because she was loud, but because she was brave. That was who she was, and that is who she will continue to be as she lives in our collective memory. We will remember her in the words of Ella Wheeler Wilcox. There is no chance, no destiny, no fate that can circumvent or hinder or control the firm resolve of a determined soul. The colleague put it so poignantly. Lise, my life was enhanced because my path intersected with yours. I will be forever grateful. And what does it say about Lisa's character that she not only touched the hearts of her UCT colleagues, but in the relatively short time that she was here at Stellenbosch, she built deep, meaningful connections with her new colleagues too. As one colleague shared, I had the privilege of working closely with Lise over the past 3 years. I witnessed her profound impact, not only through her strategic leadership, but also through her thoughtful engagement with colleagues across the institution. She brought exceptional insight, integrity, and unwavering commitment to advancing academic excellence and the transformation of teaching and learning. Her intellect was matched by her humanity. She had the softest heart and the most open door. Her compassion and kindness knew no bounds. Personally, Lise became an inspirational mentor, wise, generous, and endlessly encouraging. Even after facing health challenges, her dedication remained unshaken. When urged to take more time to rest, she smiled and said, "Are you crazy? What should I do with myself all day? I'd lose my mind if I just sat there." That was Lise, fiercely committed when there was work to be done. Her legacy will live on in the structures she helped shape, the people she uplifted, and the value she embodied. And so, as we remember Lise today, I am reminded of the words of Mevlana Rumi. Let the beauty of what you love be what you do. Every craft, every skill, every talent you have has been given as trust. To use it with sincerity is to let the beauty of what you love become what you do. If you are an artist, let your art remind others of light. If you are a teacher, let your words awaken hearts. If you are a builder, let your structures stand as signs of integrity. Love is not found in the grand moments only, but in the everyday acts of care, courage, and commitment. For Lise, the beauty of what she loved was visible in everything she did. In the way she spoke, in the way she gave of herself very often, in the way she forgave. She sought excellence in everything, not to be admired by others, but because love, Lisa's love, refuses mediocrity. The beauty of what Lise loved was visible in the way she moved through the world, with integrity, with purpose, with compassion and conviction. And from all we have heard and shared here today, it is clear this is the way Lise loved. And this is the way Lise lived. Rest peacefully, our Lise. You will be deeply missed, but never forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Next, we're going to have a music interlude again with the Winelands Quartet. Next, I'm going to call Professor Nico Koopman, the DVC for Social Impact, Transformation and Personnel, for a reflection.
Thanks, colleague Richard, VC Deresh, colleague Jane, family and dear ones of colleague Liz, colleagues, students. Thanks for the privilege to reflect briefly with you at this moment of mourning and honoring our dear colleague Liz. Liz called this country and this continent home, and she invested so much of her life in us. On this continent, Ubuntu is a philosophy and ethic, a spirituality and culture, a logic and well that we drink from as we journey through life and death. Other countries and continents have other words, expressions, and metaphors. We use Ubuntu as one of our metaphors. Ubuntu says we are humans through other humans. To be human is to be fellow human. It's to be fellow creature even with animals, plants, and nature. To be human is to live with both individuality and communality. It is to say, beware of the person who cannot be alone. Beware of the person who cannot be together. Ubuntu thinking says, we share in vulnerability. All of us are fragile and vulnerable and susceptible to imperfectness, to erring, to sickness, to suffering, to finitude. On every human being is written, fragile, handle with care. And Jane, you expressed that so clearly when you focused on embodiment and bodies. To be human, says Ubuntu, is to share in dependency. We live with interdependence. Scottish philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre calls us dependent rational beings, even dependent rational animals. We are dependent upon each other from cradle to grave. Ubuntu therefore cries out against the philosophy of I am strong, therefore I am. I am independent, therefore I am. I don't need anyone, therefore I am. Ubuntu rather says, because we are, I am. Because I need you, I am. And colleague Deresh, as you like to stress belonging, Ubuntu says, because I belong, therefore I am. Ubuntu logic says we share in the quest for a life of humaneness, of human dignity, and human rights for all. Ubuntu echoes Steve Biko's plea in 1973. Please bestow upon our country a more human face. We were touched by Liz Lange. We are colleagues for a long time before she came to Stellenbosch. She, many years ago, even facilitated at an institutional strategic planning session of the university, and you can imagine how lively that session was, full of provocation and innovation. We served together in the Cape Consortium of Higher Education. I represented Stellenbosch and she represented UCT. Never a dull moment. Liz enriched our lives with her practicing of Ubuntu without her necessarily using the word. And now I must say I also practice digital transformation, so I typed in on Google and ChatGPT, Liz Lange on Ubuntu. And then the answers I got is, we're not sure whether she really wrote about it, but she definitely reflects the ideas for which Ubuntu stands. Colleagues, she embraced individuality and communality, humaneness and dignity, and she did it with passion. So, Liz Lange did her thing in distinctive Lizian style. I don't know whether there's such a word, but Lizian style. She did her thing with contagious excellence, empowering excellence, and energizing excellence. You walked away from her knowing, yes, we can do better and we should do better. Some people are too kind to be honest. Some are too honest to be kind. Liz was both honest and kind. She spoke with the firm tongue of a prophet and the tender heart of a priest. She consistently radiated sincerity and genuineness and authenticity. We still had a date, Richard, lunch date with her to talk about how are we going to implement the Kirkor recommendations. And she said in the first meeting, you're not coming to me romanticizing Kirkor. A lot of things went wrong there. And we said, okay, we'll follow up, Liz. Ubuntu also means solidarity in times of joy and solidarity in times of loss and sadness. We are gathered here to express solidarity and sympathy and empathy with Jane and the dear ones of colleague Liz. We assure you our hearts and our prayers go out to you for strength and consolation for every step of the journey of mourning and longing. Let me conclude. Ubuntu living implies that we overcome forgetfulness. Human beings are forgetful beings. We need to be reminded all the time. We remember in Ubuntu thinking our ancestors, those who were before us, those who were with us and who passed on. And we even remember those who are yet to come. And we spell in Ubuntu language, remember in hyphenated fashion, re-member. Again, a member. Always a member. Last year, I thanked Liz for an illuminating remark that she had made in a meeting. She said, don't be afraid of repetition. Repetition is important because you never repeat from the same point. And Jane, you could tell the same story again in this Lycean philosophy. You tell it from a new point of departure. Liz, we will definitely remember. She will stay a member intimately of you as family, but also of us as university community. And somehow I believe, our finite and even fleeting moments of interaction and communion with Liz will receive eternal value. Colleagues, I would like us, before I hand back to colleague Richard, to stand and observe a moment of silence honoring Liz Lange. I thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you very much, Nico. Colleagues, before we close, I want to read some memories on tributes of our guests online and their thoughts on Liz. 1, her straightforward personality in meetings, and also her accent. Prof. Lange was a firm believer that people, more especially executives, council members, should take responsibility and accountability, even if they were on the wrong end of the stick, that we know. She had a refreshing candor that everyone appreciated. She was genuine and forthright, never afraid to share her true thoughts. I will remember Liz as a dynamic leader who once said, quote, "I will lead from the front, push from the back, and swing from the corner if needed," unquote. I deeply admired her courage and strength until the end, as she passed away, quote, "with her boots on." She was a principled and fearless advocate for so many people and a great mentor and sounding board. She listened intently and with care. Her leadership during COVID and the rapid shift was exemplary, but my favorite memory was when, during the Desire to Learn Fusion conference, she resolutely refused to be wowed by corporate BS being presented and called out the company for the caring for profits over learning. I will dearly miss her honesty, forthrightness, and relentless competence. She was a rare light of hope in a difficult time. And finally, I admired her candor, authenticity, and moral courage. It is because of Prof. Lange that many of us at the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching at UCT have permanent jobs today. Thank you, Prof. Lange. You will be remembered and you will certainly be missed. Colleagues, I will now do the vote of thanks. We have heard tributes that speak to the breadth and depth of Liz's contribution and to the many ways she shaped our thinking and our institutional work, but more importantly, the person, the body who was Liz. I would firstly like to extend our thanks to Daresh for offering the tribute on behalf of SU and for situating Liz's work so clearly within our academic project, but also, again, her humanity. To Jane and family, thank you for allowing us to have today. Thank you also for taking my calls when it was very a difficult time for you and being able to speak to you. Thank you very much for that and for today again. To Miriam, thank you for representing colleagues from UCT and from Stellenbosch. But more importantly, as Jane indicated, when Liz with all her might tried to resign, your team was resolute that under no circumstances are we going to allow her to resign. Thank you for that humanity in a moment of very sadness for the family, that your team, Nico, was so warm, so generous in their compassion. To the Wineland String Quartet, thank you for holding the emotional space of this gathering and with dignity. To Nico, thank you for guiding our moment of reflection. And then to every colleague who helped organize Memorial, your work is deeply appreciated. No, Candace, you're going to hate it, but thank you very much for making this all happen, for chasing me through all of this. So thank you very much to you, to the communications team, and to everyone at the university for making this possible. To Juanita Pina, the acting dean of the law faculty, her PA Shaznin Arnolds, and then no doubt Kathy and Gerda Adams for giving us this venue today to reflect on Liz's life. To all of you who joined us today, whether in person or online, thank you for honoring Liz and for carrying forward the work to which she devoted her life. As we conclude, I offer a short reflection from Antjie Krog. What is remembered lives, not in stone, but in how we continue the work. May we continue the work. Thank you. Hasta luego, Liz. We will miss you. We will now have some refreshments outside, friends and colleagues. Thank you very much.